What if I told you there was a Pontiac engine so underrated by its own manufacturer that its official horsepower number was off by nearly 60 horses? An engine that made engineers at Ford and Chrysler scramble back to their drawing boards. An engine that proved you didn't need the biggest displacement to dominate the street. 370 horsepower. That's what Pontiac claimed. The real number? We're talking 425 plus at the flywheel. This is the story of the 1969 Pontiac 400 Ram Air IV, the most misunderstood muscle car engine of the golden era. Picture this. It's 1969 at US 30 drag strip in Gary, Indiana. A bone stock GTO Judge with the Ram Air IV rolls up to the line. Factory tires, factory exhaust, factory everything. The time slip comes back, 13.1 seconds at 107 miles per hour. The crowd doesn't believe it. Neither does the competition. That's supercar territory for 1969, and this thing supposedly only made 370 horsepower. Something didn't add up. The Pontiac 400 Ram Air IV wasn't just another big block muscle car engine. It was a masterclass in airflow engineering that rewrote the rules of street performance. While everyone else was chasing cubic inches, Pontiac's engineers were obsessing over port design, valve timing, and induction efficiency. The result was an engine that punched so far above its weight class that insurance companies started asking uncomfortable questions about those horsepower ratings. To understand why the Ram Air IV was such a revolution, we need to travel back to 1967. The muscle car wars were heating up. Chevrolet had the 427. Ford was swinging the 428 Cobra Jet. Chrysler was unleashing the 446 pack and the mighty Hemi. And Pontiac? They were stuck with a corporate ban on engines over 400 cubic inches in intermediate cars. General Motors brass didn't want their divisions competing with Chevrolet's Corvette. So while everyone else was going bigger, Pontiac had to get smarter. The problem was simple, but devastating. How do you compete with 440s and 454s when you're limited to 400 cubic inches? How do you run with the big dogs when corporate politics have you on a leash? Pontiac's answer came from an unlikely source, their Trans Am racing program. See, the SCCA Trans Am series had a 305 cubic inch limit, forcing Pontiac engineers to extract maximum power from minimal displacement. The lessons learned on those screaming, high-revving race engines would transform their street program. Enter Herb Adams and the Skunkworks team at Pontiac Engineering. These guys weren't interested in playing by the rules. If they couldn't go bigger, they'd go better. The Ram Air IV project started with a simple observation. Most street engines couldn't breathe. Sure, they had displacement, but the ports were too small, the valves couldn't flow enough air, and the induction systems were compromised by packaging constraints. What if they designed an engine that could actually use all 400 cubic inches? The development began with the cylinder heads. Now here's where it gets interesting. Pontiac went with round exhaust ports instead of the traditional D ports. Sounds simple, right? Wrong. Those round ports flowed 290 cubic feet per minute on the exhaust side. The competition was struggling to hit 220. The intake ports were equally massive. We're talking ports so big that Pontiac engineers initially worried they'd killed low-end torque completely. The intake valves measured 2.11 inches. The exhausts were 1.77 inches. For comparison, a big block Chevy 427 used 2.19-inch intakes and 1.72-inch exhausts, but the Pontiac's ports flowed better thanks to their shape and finish. But here's the kicker. Those massive ports needed equally massive volumes of air, and that's where the Ram Air name came from. This wasn't marketing fluff like some manufacturers pulled. The Ram Air IV had functional hood scoops that fed directly into a sealed air cleaner housing. At 60 miles per hour, those scoops were ramming an additional 20 cubic feet of cool, dense air per minute into the engine. Cool air is dense air. Dense air makes power. Simple physics. Brilliant execution. The technical deep dive on this engine reads like a race shop parts list. The compression ratio was 10.75.1 right on the edge for pump gas in 1969, any higher and you'd need racing fuel. The camshaft was a mechanical flat tappet design with 308 degrees of advertised duration on the intake side and 320 degrees on the exhaust. Overlap was 88 degrees. Those numbers might not mean much to non-engineers, but let me put it this way. This cam was so aggressive that the engine barely idled. At traffic lights, it sounded like it wanted to stall. That rough idle became the Ram Air IV's signature. The bottom end was built to take abuse. Forged steel connecting rods, forged aluminum pistons from TRW, 4-bolt main-bearing caps on the center, 3 journals. The crankshaft was nodular iron, not forged steel, but Pontiac's metallurgy was so good that it never became a weak point. The oiling system featured a high-volume pump and windage tray to keep oil on the pickup during hard launches. Every detail was optimized for high RPM operation. The aluminum intake manifold was another piece of engineering art. Cast by Winters Foundry, it featured equal-length runners designed to maximize the ram effect at high RPM. The quadrajet carburetor on top flowed 750 cubic feet per minute. But this wasn't just any Q-jet. The Ram Air IV used a special calibration with richer jets, different metering rods, and modified secondary air valves. The throttle bores were also matched to the intake manifold for smoother airflow. Now let's talk about that horsepower rating. 370 at 5,500 RPM, 445 pound-feet of torque at 3,900 RPM. Those were the official numbers. But every single person who actually tested these engines knew something was up. Hot Rod Magazine put a Ram Air IV GTO on their dyno. With just headers and tuning, it made 428 horsepower. Carcraft tested a judge and calculated 425 horsepower just to achieve the recorded trap speeds. The NHRA factored these engines at 425 horsepower for class racing. So why did Pontiac lie? Insurance, pure and simple. By 1969, insurance companies were catching on to the muscle car game. They'd started surcharging anything with a horsepower-to-weight ratio over a certain threshold. Young buyers, Pontiac's target market, were getting priced out. So Pontiac played games with the numbers. They tested the engines with restrictive exhaust manifolds. They used conservative correction factors. They did everything legally possible to keep that number under 400. Meanwhile, every Ram Air IV that rolled off the assembly line was a legitimate 425 horsepower sledgehammer. The proof was in the performance. A 3,800-pound GTO with the Ram Air IV and a 4-speed manual could hit 60 miles per hour in 5.8 seconds. The quarter mile fell in 13.1 to 13.3 seconds at 107 to 108 miles per hour. Those numbers were right there with 446 packs and 454 LS6s, cars that supposedly had 50 to 80 more horsepower, cars with 40 to 54 more cubic inches. The Ram Air IV was making fools of them all, and it was doing it while meeting federal emission standards. Production numbers tell another story. Between 1969 and 1970, Pontiac built exactly 1,618 Ram Air IV engines. That's it. 759 went into 1969 GTOs, 397 powered Firebirds and Trans Ams, the rest scattered across judges, convertibles, and the occasional executive's personal car. Each engine was hand-assembled at Pontiac's Tonawanda, New York plant. The builders actually signed their work. You could find their stamp on the block. The racing homologation specials were even wilder. Pontiac built a handful of Ram Air IV cars with special features for superstock drag racing. These got even wilder cams, lighter valve train components, and aluminum body panels. Royal Pontiac in Michigan became famous for their Ram Air IV Firebirds that ran deep into the 12s with minimal modifications. Arnie Beswick was clicking off 11.90s at 114 miles per hour with a basically stock Ram Air IV GTO. The NHRA had to keep refactoring these cars to keep them competitive. The street racing scene absolutely lost its mind over these engines. On Woodward Avenue, on Van Nuys Boulevard, on any strip of asphalt where pride and pink slips were on the line, the Ram Air IV became legendary. Owners quickly learned tricks, advanced the timing to 38 degrees total, gap the plugs to .035, run the highest octane fuel you could find, free up the exhaust with headers. Do those four things, and you had a reliable 450 horsepower street terror. But let's talk about the competition because context matters. The 1969 Dodge 440 six-pack was rated at 390 horsepower. Real number? About 410. The 1969 Chevy 427 L88, rated at 430, actually made about 460. The Ford 428 Cobra Jet, rated at 335, really about 410. The Ram Air IV, supposedly the weakest at 370, was actually right in the thick of it at 425 plus. And it was giving away 28 to 54 cubic inches to all of them. Here's what made the Ram Air IV special beyond just power. This engine actually worked on the street. The Chevy L88 needed race gas and couldn't idle in traffic. The Chrysler Hemi needed constant valve adjustments. The Ford Cobra Jet had oiling problems on hard launches. The Ram Air IV? It was temperamental, sure, but it was reliable. You could drive it to work on Monday and race it on Saturday. Try that with an L88. The engineering philosophy behind the Ram Air IV influenced everything that came after. When Pontiac developed the Super Duty 455 in 1973, they used Ram Air IV heads as the starting point. When aftermarket companies started making performance cylinder heads in the 1980s, they copied Ram Air IV port designs. Even today, any serious Pontiac build starts with understanding what made the Ram Air IV work. There's a story that perfectly captures the Ram Air IV's character. In 1969, a young engineer at Pontiac wanted to see what the engine could really do. He bolted one to an engine dyno with headers, no accessories, and optimal tuning. The engine screamed to 6,400 RPM and made 501 horsepower before he chickened out and lifted. 501 horsepower from 400 cubic inches in 1969. With 1960s technology, that's 1.25 horsepower per cubic inch, a figure that wouldn't become common until the 1990s. The problem that killed the Ram Air IV wasn't competition or technology. It was the Clean Air Act of 1970. Those massive ports and wild cam timing made it impossible to meet the new emission standards. Pontiac tried to develop a Ram Air V with tunnel port heads, but it was even less streetable. By 1971, compression ratios were dropping, unleaded gas was coming, and the insurance companies had won. The Ram Air IV died not because it was beaten, but because the game changed. Today, finding an original Ram Air IV car is like striking gold. A numbers matching 1969 GTO Judge with the Ram Air IV can fetch $150,000 to $200,000. A Ram Air IV Trans Am? You're looking at $300,000 or more if it's perfect. Even bare Ram Air IV engines trade for $25,000 to $35,000. The round port heads alone sell for $5,000. These aren't just engines anymore. They're artifacts from Detroit's greatest era. The restoration community treats Ram Air IV engines with religious reverence. Every part has been reproduced, from the aluminum intake to the special harmonic balancer. Machine shops specialize in nothing but Ram Air IV rebuilds. There are guys who've spent decades learning every casting number, every date code, every factory marking. They can tell you the difference between a June 1969 and a September 1969 engine just by looking at the machining marks. But here's what really matters about the Ram Air IV. It proved that there was more to performance than just cubic inches. While everyone else was in an arms race of displacement, Pontiac showed that airflow, port design, and induction efficiency could make up for a size disadvantage. The Ram Air IV didn't just compete with bigger engines, it embarrassed them. It changed how Detroit thought about engine design. The influence extends to modern performance. Today's engineers obsess over volumetric efficiency, port flow, and cam timing, all lessons learned from engines like the Ram Air IV. When GM developed the LS series, they focused on airflow over displacement. When Ford created the Coyote 5.0, they prioritized breathing over bore size. The Ram Air RV's DNA is in every modern performance engine. Let that sink in for a moment. An engine designed over 50 years ago using slide rules and flow benches that would seem primitive today achieved performance figures that wouldn't be matched for decades. The Ram Air IV made 1.06 horsepower per cubic inch in street trim. The vaunted Chevrolet LS6 450R only 0.99. The Ford Boss 429 just 0.85. The Mopar 446 pack about 0.93. Size didn't matter when you could breathe. The human side of this story is equally compelling. The Ram Air IV was developed by a small team of engineers who were told it couldn't be done. They were fighting corporate restrictions, emissions regulations, and the basic laws of physics. Malcolm McKellar, who designed the heads, spent countless hours with modeling clay and die grinders, shaping ports by hand until they flowed just right. Herb Adams fought corporate bean counters for every dollar of development money. These guys weren't just building an engine, they were proving a point. There's something uniquely American about the Ram Air IV story. Faced with arbitrary restrictions, the engineers didn't give up or play it safe. They got creative. They pushed boundaries, they found loopholes, they built something that shouldn't have worked as well as it did. And when the insurance companies tried to shut them down with surcharges, they just lied about the power and kept on building them. It's brilliant. It's rebellious. It's absolutely perfect. The Ram Air IV also represented the last gasp of true factory hot rods. These weren't comfort-oriented GT cars with big engines. They were barely civilized race cars with license plates. The clutch was heavy. The idle was rough. The fuel economy was abysmal. The ride was harsh, and nobody who bought one cared. They wanted performance, period. Everything else was secondary. Consider the engineering courage required to release the Ram Air IV to the public. This engine needed premium fuel when regular was 29 cents a gallon and premium was 38 cents. It needed valve adjustments every 10,000 miles. It fouled spark plugs if you babied it. It got maybe 10 miles per gallon on a good day. Pontiac knew all of this and built it anyway because they knew their customers. They knew there were 1,000 under 18 people out there who would accept all those compromises for the performance. The cultural impact went beyond just street racing. The Ram Air IV became a symbol of defiance. Here was proof that clever engineering could overcome bureaucratic limitations. It showed that Detroit could still build world-class performance engines despite tightening regulations. It gave young enthusiasts hope that the performance car wasn't dead, just evolving. Every Ram Air IV that smoked a big block on the street was a middle finger to the establishment. In the end, the Ram Air IV's legacy isn't just about horsepower or quarter-mile times. It's about the philosophy that created it. The idea that intelligence beats brute force, that airflow matters more than displacement, that honesty in advertising is optional when insurance companies are trying to kill your market, that sometimes the best engine isn't the biggest or the most powerful on paper, but the one that actually works in the real world. Think about what Pontiac achieved. They took a 400 cubic inch engine, small by muscle car standards, and made it run with the biggest, baddest engines Detroit had ever produced. They did it through superior engineering, not superior displacement. They created an engine so good that they had to lie about its output to keep selling it. They built a legend that still influences engine design today. The Ram Air IV reminds us that the golden age of muscle cars wasn't just about excess. It was about innovation. It was about engineers who refused to accept limitations. It was about companies willing to build something special even if they could only sell a few thousand. It was about giving customers exactly what they wanted. Consequences be damned. So the next time someone tells you there's no replacement for displacement, remember the Ram Air IV. Remember those round ports flowing 290 cubic feet per minute. Remember that aluminum intake and those functional hood scoops. Remember 425 real horsepower from 400 cubic inches when everyone else needed 440 or 454 to get there? Remember that sometimes, just sometimes, being smarter beats being bigger. The Pontiac 400 Ram Air IV wasn't just an engine, it was a statement, a proof of concept, a challenge to the status quo. It was everything that made American performance cars great, innovative, rebellious, and absolutely uncompromising. In a world of corporate restrictions and government regulations, it was pure, distilled freedom in cast iron and aluminum. And for 1,118 lucky owners, it was the ride of a lifetime. What's the rarest muscle car engine you've ever seen in person? Was it a Ram Air IV? Something even more exotic? Drop a comment and let me know. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of Detroit's most underrated power plants, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We've got plenty more legendary engine stories coming your way. Until next time, keep those engines singing, and remember, sometimes the best victories are the ones nobody sees coming.